January 23rd, 1961. A B-52 bomber breaks apart 5 miles above the fields of Goldsboro, North Carolina. Inside its shattered frame are 2 hydrogen bombs, each one more than 250 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. As the aircraft tears itself apart in the night sky, both weapons begin to fall. And one of them does something no nuclear weapon is ever supposed to do. It starts to arm itself.
This is the story of the night America almost destroyed its own coastline, and the one mechanical switch that stood between a quiet farming town and a disaster that would have changed history.
It's the height of the Cold War. Tensions with the Soviet Union are at a breaking point. The United States keeps nuclear-armed bombers in the air around the clock, a strategy called airborne alert. The idea is simple. If the Soviets ever strike first, American bombers carrying nuclear weapons will already be airborne, ready to respond within minutes. It's meant to prevent war. Tonight, it nearly causes a catastrophe. A B-52 Stratofortress takes off from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. It's a routine mission, one of hundreds flown that year. The bomber carries 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs, each with a yield of about 3.8 megatons. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 250 times the destructive power of the bomb that leveled Hiroshima. 2 of these on one plane, flying over American soil. As the aircraft begins a refueling rendezvous, the crew notices something wrong. Fuel is leaking from the right wing. Fast. Within minutes, the aircraft has lost more than 37,000 pounds of fuel. The mission commander reports the problem to ground control. He's told to hold his current position and prepare for a second refueling attempt. But the leak doesn't stop. It gets worse. By the time the crew turns back toward Seymour Johnson, the bomber has lost so much fuel that landing is no longer an option. The aircraft is coming apart from the inside, structurally compromised by stress no B-52 was designed to survive. At 2,300 feet, the order comes. Bail out. 5 of the 8 crew members eject safely. 2 more die in the crash. 1 never gets out at all. As the bomber breaks apart in midair, the unimaginable happens. The forces of the disintegration trigger the same sequence that would occur if the crew had deliberately released the weapons for an attack. Both Mark 39 bombs separate from the aircraft and begin to fall toward the earth. One bomb deploys its parachute exactly as designed. It drifts down gently and is found hanging from a tree, completely intact, recovered without major incident. The second bomb does not. Its parachute fails to deploy. It free falls thousands of feet and slams into a muddy field at tremendous speed, burying itself deep into the soft North Carolina earth. What investigators discover in the days that follow is almost impossible to comprehend. Of the bomb's 4 arming switches, the safety mechanisms designed to prevent an accidental detonation, 3 had already switched to the armed position during the chaos of the crash. 3 of 4. One switch stood between Goldsboro, North Carolina, and a nuclear detonation, roughly 260 times more powerful than the bomb that devastated Hiroshima.
Declassified documents would later reveal just how close the country came. A senior Pentagon official who reviewed the incident years afterward stated plainly that by the slimmest of margins, a single switch prevented the disaster. If that last switch had failed too, the explosion wouldn't have just destroyed the immediate area. The fallout, depending on wind conditions, could have spread toward Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, even New York. Government estimates suggested the blast and radioactive contamination could have affected millions of people across the East Coast. And it almost happened by accident. Not an enemy attack, not a deliberate strike. A fuel leak, a structural failure, and physics no one fully understood until it was too late. For decades, the full details of what happened that night in Goldsboro were kept from the American public. Officials acknowledged a bomber crash. They acknowledged 2 weapons had been involved. But the truth about how close that second bomb came to detonating stayed buried in classified files for nearly 50 years. It wasn't until investigative journalists pursued declassified documents through the Freedom of Information Act that the full picture emerged. The government's own internal assessments confirmed what officials had downplayed for half a century. This was not a contained accident. This was a near miss of staggering proportions. And here's the part that should unsettle you most. Goldsboro wasn't an isolated failure. It was a symptom of a much larger problem. Throughout the Cold War, nuclear weapons were transported, stored, and flown on missions using safety systems that were, by today's standards, alarmingly primitive. Multiple incidents involving lost, damaged, or accidentally armed nuclear weapons occurred across the decades. Incidents the public rarely heard about, often discovered only decades later through declassification. The Goldsboro incident became one of the key catalysts for change. In its aftermath, the U.S. military began a complete overhaul of how nuclear weapons were armed, transported, and safeguarded. New mechanical and electronic safeguards were developed specifically to ensure that a structural failure, a crash, or human error could never again bring a weapon this close to detonating on its own. But for the people who lived in that small North Carolina town, none of that mattered in the moment. They had no idea, as they went about their evening, how close they came to being erased from the map by their own government's weapon. A weapon meant to protect them. A weapon that, for a few terrifying seconds, was a single switch away from destroying everything they knew. Today, a marker stands near the crash site, memorializing the airmen who lost their lives that night. Most visitors who pass it have no idea what almost happened, just feet from where they're standing. No idea that a piece of one of the bombs remains buried in that ground to this day, considered too dangerous and too deeply embedded to ever fully remove. The Cold War is remembered for the moments the world held its breath. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Wall, the arms race that nearly tipped into annihilation. But some of the closest calls weren't standoffs between superpowers at all. They were quiet, accidental, and almost entirely unknown to the people they could have killed. Goldsboro, North Carolina, never made the headlines the way Cuba did. There was no missile crisis, no televised address, no global panic. Just a broken switch, a buried bomb, and a small town that never knew how close it came
to becoming a footnote in the worst chapter of human history. Sometimes the line between safety and catastrophe isn't drawn by treaties or diplomacy. It's drawn by a single mechanical switch, doing exactly what it was built to do, on the one night it mattered most.